Hi, everybody, and welcome back to my podcast, A Catholic's Perspective, the podcast all about being a young Catholic surviving in a secular world. Today, I have a special guest with me. I have Father Robert Nixon. You might remember him from when we did the Meditations on Death, which was a book he translated. And so I'm very happy to welcome him back to now talk about the Protestant Reformation and everything like that. So welcome, Father Nixon. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Amber Rose. It's fantastic to have the opportunity to speak to you and to share with your many listeners.
No, I'm really excited for this one. I feel like our topic today is so important, especially in today's day and age where we're really seeing a lot of the effects of the Protestant Reformation or Protestant Revolution, as I like to call it, because Protestant literally means to protest. So it's like, what are they protesting? We found out. So, I guess kind of just diving in here, could you go into a little bit of the history of the Protestant Reformation, how it came about, and the consequences?
Yeah, so the Protestant Reformation came about, towards the very end of the Middle Ages. Its forces started to emerge. And this was in response to a number of things. Firstly, there was the development of printing and so forth, which led to a lot more people having opinions and publishing opinions. But very importantly, there were strong political forces and economic forces at work at the time. And there were various nations, particularly this is the case in Germany and England, where they basically wanted to be freed of the influence of the Pope, of the Church of Rome. And this freedom meant that they were then establishing themselves as independent churches, so that the state was then basically in control of the local church. And this then led to a kind of a systematic questioning of the doctrines and practices and history of the Catholic Church. And there were theologians who rebelled against the traditional teachings and practices of the church in a fairly extreme type of way. And this, in most cases, if we look at the career of the people concerned, people like Martin Luther, John Calvin, it was often because of their own desire for self-aggrandizement, And Martin Luther is a classic example of this. He was an Augustinian canon, and he was very involved in his local, within the Order of St. Augustine in Germany. And he believed in his early 20s that he was about to be made a cardinal by the Pope. And this plan was frustrated. And after that, he became really angry at the Pope, really frustrated. But at the same time, through much of his career, through the early part at least, he kept the door open, saying, I'm willing, if you promote me to Archbishop or Cardinal, I'll come back on board. So this was the type of a force which was at work. People not being able to accept the authority of the church established by Christ. And then this leads to a breakdown in all authority, both religious authority and civil authority, which ultimately leads to a form of nihilism. And I believe that atheism, secularism, are the direct consequences of the emergence of the Protestant movement.
Absolutely. And, you mentioned Martin Luther and John Calvin. It's interesting also to see how Protestantism has evolved today, because back then, even Martin Luther believed in, Mary being a perpetual virgin and these things that today we argue with Protestants on. And it's crazy to see how the division has splintered so far from the truth that now even, I don't know how to explain it, but when I talk to Protestants, it's like they're completely cut off from truth.
Yes, this is very true, and of course, what we call Protestants today exist in a wide variety of different colors. And, in some cases, I'm struck, actually, some Protestants seem more Catholic than the mainstream Catholic Church. True. On the other hand, there are Protestants who have a systematic idea that they're going to not believe anything except for what's written in the Bible. And to me, that is a completely untenable position, because if you're not going to believe anything from what's written in the Bible, why believe the Bible then?
Mm-hmm.
And
So
then
true.
the other point, which I often make, is that there is no religious denomination which follows literally everything in the Bible, that, stones people to death if they're caught in adultery, and practices everything that's in Leviticus and Deuteronomy and so forth. It would just be not practical and not possible. And so I think this is a great error. The overemphasis on the authority of Scripture, rather than
Absolutely.
the recognition that Scripture is part of our tradition, has to be mediated through the wisdom of the church and through the person of Jesus Christ.
Absolutely. That's why we have the three pillars, the magisterium, scripture, and then, of course, tradition, because with all three, we really do have an understanding of our faith. If you only have one, well, that's a stool that's going to fall over. That's a chair that's not going to stand upright.
Well, it absolutely is, And if you gave Bibles to a dozen different people and said, come up with your system of beliefs from this, I could guarantee they would all come up with very different systems, and quite likely some quite crazy ones as well,
Well,
as
that's kind of what we have
we have
today.
seen, indeed, with certain Protestant sects throughout history.
Absolutely. And I definitely think today it's a lot more confusing because, I'm not exactly sure how many Protestant denominations there are these days. I think I talked to Trent Horn once in a video and he said there's not as many as people think, but there are a lot. And it's always interesting to me because I always ask Protestants, depending on their denomination. I'm like, well, what makes you think you guys have the full truth when even Protestants, like, they contradict themselves so often and can't even agree on anything? At least with the Catholic Church has a firm belief. Certain Catholics might differ depending on their catechesis and stuff, but the magisterium, tradition, and the scripture all together create a foundation for us to believe in, and that does not change.
Exactly. So Christ intended there to be only one church, and there is, in fact, only one church. So the Catholic Church is not a denomination. We are the church. And having said that, of course, there are different Catholic rites in different parts of the world and so forth. These are not different churches, but they're different expressions of the one church. And this is so important for people in their religious faith, to have this sense of solidity and security and constancy.
Mm.
People, their life in general, their work, their relationships, their health, their situation often is in a state of flux and change. A person, when they go into a church, wants to know, needs to know that what the beliefs they're going to hear articulated there are the same from age to age, from not only over the course of their own life, but over the course of the centuries. This
Mm.
sense of the eternal, which is God. And to reflect, if God is eternal, then of course the church is eternal. Its teachings and beliefs are also necessarily eternal. This doesn't mean that there can't be minor changes in, practices, customs to suit the needs of the age. But having said that, the fundamentals need to be constant. And I would go even further than that. I'd say that the elements of the liturgy
Mhm.
need to be constant, because going to church is not like going to a cinema or a musical concert. You don't want something different every week or
So some
every
people
couple
might
of
convince you
years
they
or whatever.
do.
Right. But it actually doesn't work. I think that if we look at the history of the Protestant denominations and the ones in our own time, particular ones flourish for a certain period, have a boost of popularity, and then they kind of fade away and are replaced by something else. You look at the people, and I've known a lot of individuals who have become involved in these, from different backgrounds, often from non-Catholic or non-Christian countries, and they get like taken up in the music or whatever. It often doesn't last for all of that long. It lasts for a few years, maybe when they're getting through some difficulty or whatever. But then after a while, it, fades away. And what is missing is the sacramental reality. And the sacramental reality, of course, the Eucharist, and the sacramental nature of the entire church.
100%. And I feel like a lot of Protestant denominations, they base a lot of things off of their emotions and how they feel. And because our emotions are constantly changing and constantly fleeting, and yeah, you might have this high from going to this mega church where they play some song on repeat. They play the bridge 20 times. But
Yeah,
in reality, it's not what our souls are hungry for. Our souls are hungry for Jesus Christ in the Eucharist, not the guitar and the youth pastor in skinny jeans. Like, that's not what we want. We want beauty, and our souls want that, even if we don't recognize we want it because we haven't been raised with it. But I
mm,
also recognize that in a lot of denominations, because they are so emotional, I mean, I can think of Baptists who are like brimstone and fire, and Lutherans who are also brimstone and fire to an extent. And I think about these Protestant denominations that have, for the most part, stayed the same: Anglican, Lutheran, all that. Also, I'm pretty sure Martin Luther would hate having a religion named after him. I'm pretty sure he didn't want
oh
that.
yes, well, mm,
Right?
um,
Something like that.
yeah, yeah. Luther is a very strange character. I wrote I translated a life of Luther recently for the Census Fidelium Press, the ones who
Cool.
published the Theatre of Cruelty, and with the case of Luther, it seems he became a bit deranged towards the end of his life, and
Yeah.
started to see himself as the sole authentic transmitter of Christianity. So he did kind of start to see himself as a bit of a messiah at the end.
I
This
see.
is there. So there was a bit of a descent into, I would say, just was kind of madness with Luther, and compounded by the fact that he was, a heavy drinker and fairly um, narcissistic, and quite violent temperament. So Luther is, I think, a strange, very strange character. But certainly, if he was alive today, if someone could, revive Martin Luther, he would be shocked to see, female clergy.
Mhm.
He would be shocked. He would be appalled to see homosexual marriages
Yep.
taking place in some Protestant churches. Yeah. So, if we went back now and saw Martin Luther doing a mass as he did it, most Catholics would probably think, gee, this is a really traditional mass.
That's
And,
true.
my own experience dealing with some kind of high Anglicans, they actually seem in their liturgy, it's actually more like the pre-Vatican II
Mm,
Catholic liturgy than what our own current liturgy
right.
is. So, and I think it's quite a common experience. At our monastery, we get a lot of Protestant visitors, and they come here because they're attracted to the essential elements of our Catholic faith. The quietness and the dignity of the liturgy, our
Right.
emphasis on the mystical experience, our not getting trapped up in fluctuating dogmas and so forth, but rather this sense of constancy, and for us Benedictines, stability. And this is something which is not only important for Benedictines, but I believe for the religious life of everyone. Because as I said before, the other parts of our life can be in a state of flux. The one thing you need to know is solid and sure and stable is your faith,
Absolutely.
is God, is what you believe in. And when that enters into a state of flux, which we often see happening, and some people are trying to make that happen in the Catholic Church even, it's a bad thing. It doesn't attract more people. And this is one of the great, I think, tragedies of which has beleaguered the church. In some cases, people say we're going to make things more inclusive, more contemporary, and they're going to get a lot of people back into the church when you do that. The reality is that when you do that, you lose a
Yeah.
lot of people, and you don't get really that many new recruits. So I think we need to think about that. Be very aware of what our treasure is as Catholics, and keep this alive, preserve it, make the best of it, not be ashamed of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing about consistency is so important, and I think that's something that really drew me to the traditional Latin mass was, Latin is the official language of the church. And so before Vatican II, you could go anywhere, and if there was a Catholic mass, it would be in Latin. And even if you didn't know Italian, you didn't know French, you knew Latin, and you could like kind of include yourself in the mass in that way. And now I go to like, not bashing Novus Ordo here, because like I do go to Novus Ordo, but reverent Novus Ordos, of course. But I've gone to a lot of really, really, really bad Novus Ordos as well. And whenever I go to a Novus Ordo, no matter where it is or what state it's in or something, it's always different. Even if it's like down the block from each other, they're always different. They use different prayers at the beginning, and like they don't do certain prayers, they replace other prayers with this prayer, they don't use the same words when it comes to consecration, and I'm just like, this is so confusing and it's
Yeah,
so
yeah,
hard to follow and feel like I'm a part of it when it doesn't feel consistent.
yeah. That is very true, Amber. And this is, I think, one of the things which has crept into the practice of the church in certain respects, where where the presiders feel a need to make things different all the
Mhm.
time. And as priests, uh, as a priest, I'm very aware that I'm a sacramental minister of the church. I'm dispensing the sacraments of the church, not of my own creation. And this is so important that we do this with humility. And that implies, a sticking to the details of the rite as given by the church. And whether that is the Tridentine Missal or the Novus Ordo, I mean, both are authentic and valid rites of the church, and both can be done reverently and properly. And we think sometimes, I think there's an idea that people are going to get bored if they hear the same thing every Sunday. Well, they're not going to get bored, because for most people, it's only once a week. And the other thing is, it's a prayer to God. It doesn't need to change all the time, And you think about people pray the Our Father, the Hail Mary, they don't want to change the words, or even
No.
change the translation for that matter, and rightly so. This is if you were to do a study of religious practice throughout the world, not only Christianity, but other religions as well. One of the essential elements of religion is that there's a constancy in the rites and rituals and prayers. And this makes perfect sense, because we're stepping out of the mundane world,
Mm.
stepping into something which is connected with past years, with past centuries, ultimately connected with our eternal status. And for this reason, the unchangingness of the liturgy, I think, is a central element. And not only unchangingness of the liturgy, but also unchangingness of the moral teachings.
Yeah,
You know,
100%. And I think you can correct me on this, but I feel as though when I walk into church these days, I feel like not all churches, but a majority of them put a lot of emphasis on the people and like what we want and what we need and everything. But really, mass and church in itself is about God and what we owe him and what's due to him. It's really not about us. But I feel like because of the society we live in, everyone's very egotistical, kind of narcissistic. Like it has to cater to me because I'm different than everyone else. Like diversity is a huge thing now. And I feel like that really kind of, I don't want to say cheapens the experience of being Catholic, but in a way, if we're trying to cater to everybody, we cater to nobody.
that is very true, Amber. And this is, I believe, reflected in the architecture of churches, if you look at it over the decades. In the past, churches were traditionally very high buildings extending up to heaven. And at a certain point in time, I think the 60s or 70s, and they started to make them low and flat with an emphasis, everyone is equal, everyone is part of the church. Now, look, I'm not saying that the church can't be understood as the people of God, which it certainly is. But having said that, going to church is primarily an experience of encounter with God, with the transcendent, with the eternal, with the unseen. It's not just a social event.
Mm-hmm.
And the danger of reducing religion to a social thing is always its undoing. And the way this works, and I believe we've seen this happen in Western society in general, is an overemphasis on social realities.
Mm.
So with doing social work, social justice, I mean, that stuff is all good, of course, and but if it becomes the end rather than the means, so the end, our ultimate objective is our unification with God, our participation in eternal glory. If the church comes to be seen as just another social organization, a voice which is to speak out for social justice or equal rights or the environment or whatever, then it loses its essential spiritual character. So, as I said, most people, Catholics, typically go to Mass, just once a week.
Mm.
I think it's very fitting that there should be once a week, at least, devoted to spiritual realities, in which the social realities are put aside. And it's not like that we're going to deprive people of social interaction. I mean, they've got families, friends, they can join clubs or whatever they want to do for that. But that is not what church is primarily about.
I agree. And I think especially now that people kind of treat it as a social setting, like, oh, okay, I'll go to Mass because I get to see my friends, or I go to Mass because I get donuts afterwards. Like, these are not, I know it seems like I know it seems like a great idea to tempt your child to be good during Mass by getting them a donut afterwards, but it's not teaching them the importance of the Mass. You're just bribing your kid to get through Mass. But I also feel like these days people have a very, very, very short attention span.
Oh,
So
yeah.
to them, Mass lasts forever, but an hour on your phone goes by like that. And people can barely even pay attention during Mass. So to them, they'd rather just zone out because it's too boring. And I think that's
Yeah.
probably what our leaders were, aiming to try and
Yeah,
fix.
that is. I think that's very true. This idea that people have to be kept entertained, and
Yeah.
part of the work I do is in church music, and I'm not saying that people shouldn't enjoy the experience. Of course, they should enjoy it. It needs to be filled with beauty and things which touch them and so forth. But on the other hand, the idea that they need to be constantly participating, I think, is inherently flawed and leads to a breakdown in the quality of the experience. And evidence of this. I mean, I would say the fact that in Christendom, 99% of the population went to Mass every
Right.
Sunday. Unless you were sick or crippled or mad or something like that, you went to Mass. It was just taken for granted. And the Masses often went for much longer than what they do today. And no one had any real problem with that. Now,
Right.
people today find it very difficult to get the people to Mass. And I think it's with a lot of things in life, the harder you try to get people to do something, the less they want to do that.
It's true.
If you started a club and you said, okay, everyone is welcome to come along and join in, you'd probably get no one joining. But if you said, it's really hard to get in, to be honest, don't even bother, you're probably not going to get in. Then you would have a bunch of people, a lot of people keen to get in. And I'm not saying the church is exactly like that, but this idea of becoming accessible, that you then appeal to. Now, to give you another example, it would be a bit like if you were having a musical concert and you said,
Mm,
okay, I want to appeal to everyone. I'm going to pick the dumbest music I can possibly get, you know, and I'm going to give everyone an instrument so they can all play along. It would be
ugh.
really, it would be a disaster. No one would like it. I mean, a few people might like it, but not many. On the other hand, if you do it, if you put the best into it, have a tightly put together show, professionally delivered, well thought out, then you end up with something which really touches people. And that is, you know, I think what the experience of Mass is. It's this sacramental mystery that people are coming along to. They're participating in the Eucharist by either by being there or joining their prayers with those of the priest, or by receiving the most holy body and blood of Christ. But this doesn't mean that they necessarily have to be doing things all along. You know, it's okay to be just there quietly praying and present.
I think that's one of the reasons I really love low mass is because you can't really hear what the priest is saying, and so you have time to kind of reflect and really just kinda open your heart to God and not really have
Yeah.
to worry about responses. Not that I don't love
Uh,
responses, but, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the responses are quite important. But, you know, one of the things, or one of the disadvantages of saying the Mass versus populum which is, you know, facing the people, is that there is a sense that when you're offering, and I say this as from the point of view of a priest, there's a sense that when you're saying the Eucharistic prayer, that you're actually preaching to the people, which
Mm,
is not what you're doing at all.
right,
What's happening is you are praying to God. And I think that is the strongest argument for the ad orientem, that the priest then, as head of the congregation, is leading the people in this prayer addressed to God, you know,
right,
and so important.
and I
And
think
you know,
also Go ahead.
yeah, and you know, I think that this is where, in some respects, the influence of Protestantism has crept
Mhm.
into Catholic liturgical practices. I'm not going to say in any kind of overt or dogmatic way, but certainly just on a practical level, and in respect to attitudes and
I've
practices.
definitely felt some of that, especially when I've gone to certain parishes where I feel like the mass is more of a performance to them as opposed to a sacrifice, where the priest will face the people and be like, through him and with him and in him. And I'm like, oh my gosh,
Yeah,
this is not a monologue. Come on. Like, or the lectors will be like, and then Jesus said to his disciples, go. And I'm just like, stop. This isn't theater. Like, be
yeah,
respectful, be reverent, you know, just read it, move on. Like, it's so
yeah,
distracting. And I've noticed that in some parishes, but I feel like that that specifically, the performance part of it feels kind of Protestant to me. Because I
yeah,
feel like the Protestant side of what they believe their services are in a way a performance of the mass because it's not the actual mass. It's like it's like the LARP of the mass. I don't know if that makes
yeah.
sense.
Yes, it does, because it's an understanding of the Mass not as a sacrifice of praise to God, but rather as an opportunity to, you know, to instruct the people, basically,
Right.
which is one of the things which, you know, which is an element of Protestantism which we sometimes get, an overemphasis on instructing and teaching the people
Mhm.
during the course of the Mass, which, you know, I'm not saying that it is not part of it at all. There are certainly opportunities. You know, there's the homily, and the Council of Trent was very specific about the importance of having a homily or a sermon delivered in the vernacular language so that you know, the people could understand it. And this could take place either in the course of the Mass or could take place outside of the Mass. But no, I think we're seeing a bit of an overemphasis on that today. And if I could say that that is probably, you know, this is one of the respects in which Catholic and the Protestant approach to morality differ.
Mm.
So, people often complain that Catholic morality is, so strict and so difficult, whereas the Protestants are, more free and more. I would actually disagree, for the reason that the Catholic Church poses to us a simple and clear set of things which we are obliged to do, such as attending Mass, um, and uh, and then a set of things which we are, which are prohibited, such as, fornication, adultery, theft, and so forth. Now, keeping these obligations and prohibitions is actually not that difficult. Um, if you are a normal person living a normal life, then you're going to find that these are perfectly easy to keep and natural to keep because they accord with human nature,
Hmm.
essentially. You think about it, everything which is in the teachings of the Catholic Church matches human nature, matches the laws of nature. So the Catholic Church is not asking us to do anything impossible um, in order to be saved. It's asking us to attend Mass on Sunday and holy days of obligation. It's not asking us to, swim the English Channel or anything like that, or found a hospital. It's telling us don't, don't do these particular sins. And you think about it, most of the sins you wouldn't even want to do. Um, and if you do them, it's not going to lead to, it's going to complicate and mess up your life. So keeping them just makes a lot of sense. Now, the Protestant approach, on the other hand, which kind of springs from Luther took the approach that it was impossible for human beings to keep the commandments. He
Hmm.
said, it's just not possible. We can't do it.
Didn't
And
he
so
kind
the
of
whole
refer to
purpose,
us as like a dung pile covered in God's grace or something?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And he had a very low opinion of human nature and whether
Hmm.
this emerged from his own personal experience or from negative experiences he's had. But and so he developed this idea that God's commandments were in fact contrary to our human nature, that we systematically had to overcome our natural qualities in order to become what God intended us. And moreover, he added to this that it was impossible. So for this reason, a lot of Protestant denominations don't really have clear moral teachings, about things, a whole bunch of things. And this doesn't actually make it easy for people. It means that they're in a constant state of anxiety, wondering, oh, have I sinned? Or have I, not tried hard enough, and so forth.
Right.
And I think this anxiety um, eventually leads to a kind of throwing off of morality all the time because people find themselves always feeling guilty and everything. Now, if you're a Catholic, you don't need to feel guilty if if you went to Mass and you got distracted during the prayers, or if you felt a bit impatient at someone but didn't say anything, or experienced some lustful thoughts but didn't act on them. You don't need to feel guilty about any of those things, because the commandments are clear. They're all to do with actions,
Right.
things people systematically do. And for Catholics, for something to be a sin, it has to have knowledge and it has to have will. You have to know that you're doing the wrong thing and be doing it deliberately. Now, for Protestants, sin was essentially human nature. So everything that a human being tended to do naturally was basically a sin, and that it was only God's mercy which was going to save them. Now, to me, this is a very negative point of view, and it's not one that people can sustain. They might put up with it for a few years, but then they're just going to say at a certain point, forget it all.
Right.
Whereas the Catholic morality is simply affirming our normal Catholic nature, the norms of a civilization, and it's easier to keep the Catholic commandments than it is to break them.
Absolutely.
And so I think that this is one of the great benefits of the Catholic approach to this,
I agree.
and um, and it means it's a sustainable approach.
It's kind of like the term, being truly free means to have rules to keep you safe, kind of thing. Because if you don't
Yeah.
have any rules or guidelines, you're kind of just out there for the devil to snatch.
Exactly, exactly. And God has given us these rules, not for His good, but for our own good.
Mm,
And they make a lot of sense. I mean, you think about traffic rules and regulations. The reason we have them is so people, you can drive safely, and everyone else can drive safely, and keeping them is not oppressive or difficult or anything like that. It's the same with the rules of human morality, as taught by the Catholic Church, which are, by the way, substantially the same as those taught by every other sustainable religious tradition in the world. They
right.
pertain to what we are by nature, which is free human beings, uh, male or female, living in a society based on certain hierarchies and so forth. It's not an onerous burden we're placing upon people. Unlike the Protestants, who give them something which is so vague, a vague sense of existential sin,
Yeah,
that you don't know whether you're sinning, and you really don't have any power over it yourself. You're not in control of your own actions. And, I believe Christ, as the incarnation of God, came to bring out, to exemplify the very best of what human nature can be and what it should be.
absolutely. And I definitely think, there's a lot of confusion in the Protestant denominations. That's why you see the LGBTQ flags outside some of them, and contraception's considered normal and even passed out at some Protestant places. And you think to yourself, well,
Yeah,
how did we get here? And, Father, the
exactly.
whole, go ahead, go ahead.
Yeah, and I mean, these things are so clearly against nature,
Hmm.
um, that I believe if you had a race of people who had no civilization or no religion at all, they would recognize that LGBT stuff is, I mean, of course it's against nature, right? I mean, if I was a farmer and I had a herd of sheep, and suddenly the male sheep started mating with other male sheep, I'd know something is pretty much wrong here. And
Hmm.
then the same with contraception. If I noticed that the ewes were then deliberately killing their infants or whatever, then I would also know that something was very wrong. This is the
Right.
same with human nature. To restore human nature to what it is supposed to be, I think, is the important thing today. And and in doing that, in recognizing what human nature is, I'm not saying that no one actually does struggle with these things on a biological level, but biologically, it might be like 0.1% of the population.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, you can then kind of exercise compassion and, think, well, this person's struggling, but, we won't make a big deal about it. But then if it's suddenly everywhere you look, then it does, in fact, become a problem. And this is where I believe that there are diabolical forces at work, that these things
Absolutely.
are deliberately provocative. It's not just a small minority of people trying to assert themselves. It's people trying to stir things up. And look at the Paris Olympics. You think, well, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to get yourselves killed? Um,
Yep.
are you trying to start riots when people are going to react to this type of thing? And they inevitably will. And so I think that as a whole, the Catholic Church, Western society needs to reaffirm the naturalness, the reasonableness of our traditional beliefs, and to go
Absolutely.
with them. And in going with them, we can always tolerate the very small few exceptions, but to reestablish this as a norm. And so we're fighting against evil forces in our society today, just as much as they were in the time of the Reformation.
Absolutely. And Father, one of the main reasons I wanted to have you on the podcast was because of this book that you compiled, possibly wrote. Did you compile it or did you translate it?
I translated this book, and it is called The Theatre of Cruelty, and it was published originally in 1578. It's a kind of illustrated book of atrocities which were committed by the Protestant schismatics against Catholics in Europe at that time. So I translated this for Sensus Fidelium Press,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm very pleased that it's out there now, because a lot of these things, the things that are described in it, have kind of been washed out of the official histories.
Yes.
And the reason that has happened is, well, obviously the Protestants don't want to talk about them, and Catholic historians, for a lot of reasons, have been keen to tone them down or not to talk about them so much, and also the fact that some of them are, are quite shocking,
Yeah.
and a lot of them are very shocking. So, but I felt at the same time, I know Steve Cunningham from Sensus Fidelium Press had read some of these from another work I had done, which was just through a scholarly publisher, an academic publisher, so didn't really reach a very wide audience.
Right.
But, he said it would be good if you could share some of this. So I knew about this book, and so I did. I translated it. I mentioned in the introduction that some of the very shocking things I have either left out, because I didn't want a book that you couldn't give to a teenager, or
Right.
just like something's going to freak people out. But having said that, it is still contains a lot of horrendous tortures and atrocities that took place.
When Steve first sent it to me, I was like, "Oh, the Theater of Cruelty, what's that? Like, that sounds so cool. Like, is it about a play? Is it like," I was like, "Wow." And I opened it and I was like, "Oh, oh no." Because I had no idea about any of this. I mean, I was born and raised Catholic. I grew up with tons of Protestant friends. And I was always told, oh, the Crusades were bad. Oh, the, Inquisitions were awful and this and that. And I'm like, really?
Yeah,
Because those were for a good cause, for a really good
yeah,
reason, and most of the time, it wasn't the
yeah.
Catholic Church who killed people, it was the state,
Uh,
or the government at that time, and so when I picked up this book, I felt, like, kind of low-key sick a little bit looking at some of these, illustrations just because of what a human being could do to another human being was just so astonishing to me, just simply
yeah,
because of a faith difference.
yeah. Yes, that's right, Amber. And I believe that the reason that the atrocities committed by the Protestants were so much more shocking than those of the Inquisition. We get a lot of bad images of the Inquisition. This actually originated with literature in England and in Germany, which was written by Protestant authors, and they were making the Inquisition to be this kind of sinister Spanish type, and of course the Spanish were in Spain, and England were in England and Germany were kind of seen as being a bit, a bit sinister, basically.
A little bit.
But the Inquisition actually had strict processes. Everything was done in the presence of multiple witnesses.
Mhm.
Descriptions of all the processes that were applied were kept. There was a rule that they did use torture, and I'm not saying that was right, of course, but they weren't allowed to use tortures which actually physically injured a person.
Right.
So the tortures were more things which tested people's patience, And I'm not
Mhm.
saying that, again, I'm not saying that this was right, but it was very different from what happened with the Protestants, because with the Protestants had no authority. They were just
Right.
kind of mobs of people, often led by those who seemed to be, slightly psychotic or sadistic. And when people get together in acts of cruelty, it seems like there's this evil force which
Mm.
manifests itself in the multitude, things which individuals would never do by themselves. But when there's a multitude of people, this kind of common bloodlust, which I think is what we're seeing, and it's quite shocking. And this was, I think, fueled by this type of egotism, fueled also probably by a long-term resentment that a lot of people harbored in their hearts, frustrated ambitions for wealth or power or status and so forth.
Absolutely. And, I've heard exorcists, we just talked with Father Ambrose, who's a Norbertine, and he's out in California, and he was an exorcist. And, I've talked to some exorcists about how, demons can infest generational lines and stuff. And I'm like, who's to say a demon can't infest a line of, religion? I mean, anything besides Catholicism in a way is anti God in a lot of ways. Um, and so, with all of the stuff that happened at the beginning, after the Reformation and throughout history, with, the amount of just demonic hatred that was going around, like you said, when they're in mobs, it's kind of like when you're in, a monastery or something with a bunch of holy people, you become holier. When you surround yourself with holy people, if you're around evil people,
Mhm.
you become more evil because that is the
Yeah,
influence.
uh,
And so you could see how like it's demonic almost.
it is, absolutely. And there were so many things, desecrations of churches and ways of torturing people, which would be even difficult to think about.
Mhm.
Um, for example, um, oh, cutting people open, pouring boiling oil down their throat, these type of things, putting rats into people's intestines and so forth.
Yeah.
And this does point to a kind of demonic influence, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And this is something which I believe we always need to be on our guard against, because when human beings act together as a collective, they become subhuman during that
Mm.
time. We see this in mob violence of all kinds.
We've seen that a lot in the last couple years.
Well, look, we have, and and sometimes the people as individuals might actually be kind of sane and decent people, but then somehow they all get together, and then things just start to happen.
It's crazy.
And this is because of this, breaking through of the demonic influence.
Mm.
So I think this is something we need to be on our guard against, always. And any form of like mass hysteria is, in my opinion, actually a type of demonic manifestation.
I believe it. I
And
mean, we see it a lot today. A
yeah,
lot. Like LGBTQ parades, we see it with the riots that have happened and continue happening. There was there was a riot at a hotel. There was so much stuff going on that I'm like, there's no way that only people, like, obviously there are people that are doing it, but it can't just be human influence. It has to be spiritually influenced.
yeah, yes. This is very much the case, and I think this danger of kind of collectivism is
Mm,
something we all need to be working against. And it's the essence of Marxism is the idea that there is like a collective race or collective class identity.
right.
It's also behind all forms of racism as well. The idea that there's an identity which is bigger than the individual. In reality, God has made us each as individuals to relate to Him in this way. And so I think we need to be always careful about this, and including in our religious worship. And I think it's a great. I'm not saying there's anything necessarily wrong with people getting together and having a concert and joining, but as you said, like when you have this bridge repeated 20 times and there's everyone, and I mean, I know that it's done in the name of Christ, but at the same time opening themselves up to this non-rational uh, type of hysteria is, to my mind, is a spiritually dangerous thing.
It's very emotional. And I think, Satan can manipulate our emotions. We know that. We know that he can put images in our minds that we've already seen before to cultivate a certain emotion. He can line certain things up to make us feel a certain way. So we cannot trust our emotions. We have to trust truth and we have to trust goodness and God. We can't go based off our own understanding. And we really need to understand emotions are fleeting. They're something that come and go. We'll say things in the moment we don't mean, we'll do things in the moment we don't mean, or you have
Mm.
this giant high at NCYC or at a Protestant megachurch, and then you come down from that and you're just like, God's abandoned me, I'm in desolation. And it's like, no sweetie, you just came down from the emotional high.
Yeah, exactly. And it's never a good idea to make a decision or to perform an action or even to speak in a state of high emotional intensity, whether it be good or bad.
Sure.
So that there's always this, and part of our monastic charism is this keeping silence,
Mm,
of measuring and weighing carefully all of our words and actions. And this is not necessarily something we always manage to do perfectly, but it's something that we work on. And this is the idea of a fixed and objective truth manifested in the Catholic Church is so important for people.
absolutely.
That our faith life should not be a kind of roller coaster, but on the other hand, it should be a constant.
Yes, 100%. And I think
Yeah.
especially with the inconsistency we have in today's world, the consistency of the church is so important for us to be able to regulate our emotions and regulate our soul, to not feed into the constant changing of the world with all these fads and trends and everything, but to have something
Oh yeah.
steadfast and consistent.
Yeah, that's true. And a disturbing trend, which I believe exists because of the internet, is this kind of constant culture of conjecture,
Mhm.
criticism, gossiping, and so
So
forth.
bad.
And you literally only need to look for any decision or announcement of the church, and there'll be like a dozen theories about why it's done or what it really means,
So
and
bad. Or how
so
Pope
many.
Francis took 3 days to respond to the whole Olympic thing. It's like, y'all need to chill.
Yeah, I mean, um, he could have. I mean, he's not a young man. It maybe took him a while to work it out.
Plus, I
Um,
don't think he runs his
you,
own social media platforms, so
no, I'm pretty sure he doesn't. I mean, you know, I mean, I'm I'm only 50, but I struggle with social media. Um, I'm sure he struggles with it a lot more than what I would. I mean, so not to interpret actions or not to
Mhm.
conjecture interpretations. When someone says something, to say, "Oh, but what did he really mean by this?" Or why did he say this instead of this? Just to kind of take it at the face value. And this is something which we're not so good at in this world of constant news.
Yeah,
Of constant criticisms, evaluations, and replies.
right.
So,
And I mean, we're also
yeah,
not meant to know everything that's out there. I mean,
no,
what was it back like 1,000 years ago? People didn't even know who the Pope was sometimes, and now it's like we know if he's dying or if he's not, or if he sneezes or if he what he has for breakfast.
well,
And
yeah.
it's like this guy's so busy. Like he's doing a lot of work. And is he the best pope we've ever had? No. Is he the worst pope? No. But,
Well,
you gotta take everything with the benefit of the doubt, otherwise it ruins your soul. It sends you into desolation.
yes, it does absolutely, and it does actually lead down the path to a kind of Protestantism.
True.
And there are in fact Catholics who are really Protestants, like the old Catholics, for example. uh,
Yep.
you know, and Catholics who become Orthodox. To me, that is actually a kind of Protestant type of thing to do.
Thank you. So true.
Um,
Or even
you
son of
know,
a contest.
yeah. Um, so I think just keep things I can say this: keep things at arm's length about
Mhm.
church politics and goings on. Let the people whose job it is worry about those things.
Right.
And in the meantime, have faith that Christ said he's going to be with us until the end of time, that this is the church founded upon the rock of Peter. And, just let it be, and, live your own life as well as you possibly can.
Absolutely. I mean, the most important thing is to stay close to the church, receive the sacraments, and do what is proper to your state in life. Like that's all we can do. A lot of people try to bite off more than they can chew, and genuinely try and challenge the Pope. And I'm like, but that's not your authority. That's not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to pray for our leaders because we get the leaders we deserve as people. So if there's something wrong with our leaders, there must be something wrong with us because not a lot of Catholics believe in the true presence. Not a lot of Catholics go to church anymore. And, we have dwindling numbers in religious orders, depending on the ones. I know you guys are kind of struggling right now with that
Yeah.
too.
Mm.
So to me, I'm just like, mind your own business, stay in your lane. Yes, you can disagree with certain things, of course, but to directly challenge or to say you're leaving the Catholic Church because of the hierarchy and the leadership is just really dumb to me. I feel like they don't look at the full picture. They're thinking about it very irrationally, and they
Mm.
haven't studied church history if they decide that because of this one bad pope they're going to jump overboard. It makes absolutely no sense to me seeing the popes we have had in the past. Seeing some of the things that the Catholic Church has gone through and prevailed because it is the true Church of Christ, it's just astonishing to me that people would jump overboard despite knowing that. And I think that's very spiritually dangerous. So I just tell people turn off the news, get off social media. Your life will be happier. You'll be
Yeah.
better for it.
Yes, yes, indeed, indeed. And, Amber, I mean, it does seem somewhat ironic that we are talking to each other here on social media. I
True.
guess this is, I guess
Don't
this
click
is
off this
social media.
podcast, guys. This one's okay.
But, yeah, I would encourage people definitely to be selective, and, I myself, like, I don't really use social media to any extent apart from interviews like this, and sometimes, some of my musical stuff I put on YouTube. But but the other kinds of social media, X and all of those things, where there's comments floating around,
Yeah.
and it's not a healthy world on the whole. And I'm not saying that the people who do it or get drawn into it are necessarily bad people or acting from wrong motives. And some people say, oh, it's a way of evangelization today. But, it's not really, because it plays a certain part in people's life, but it's not their whole life.
Mm-mm.
What is more important is what you do on your day-to-day life, the people you encounter on your day-to-day life. And you might get like a million likes or 1,000 likes on social media. It's actually more important or more valuable or more consequential to do one good deed to a person who is actually there,
Absolutely.
than to do that kind of thing.
And that's
and
why I
and
say
then
to live the
the
gospel
arguing,
out.
the bitterness that goes back and forth.
Yes, absolutely. And that's why I always say to live the gospel out in your everyday life and really focus on the people in your direct line of vision because you can think about going and challenging the Pope and you can think about reclaiming the Holy Land and do all that stuff, but that's really a distraction from the people who actually need your help. And we don't realize it, but just being able to live the gospels out in our lives and be that type of person, an example for other people, actually does a lot more and create a ripple effect as opposed to us going into battle or doing something else. Truly, the Lord's work is with the people, like you're saying, in your direct circles that you come in contact with every day.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. This is our primarily what God asks us to do, and this is very much, I was hungry and you fed me. I was
Hmm.
thirsty and you gave me to drink. That we don't need to go out looking for causes and things. They'll come to us
Yeah,
in the course of our normal life. And if they're not coming to us in the course of our normal life, what it means is probably that we're not paying enough attention.
right.
to actual reality, and getting trapped up in all of these causes instead of dealing with the day-to-day thing. One of the blessings of monastic life is that we are, we are dealing with everything, cleaning the monastery, doing the gardening, attending to guests, doing the daily liturgy, that this is the most important part of our life, and anything else which we might do. For myself, the translation work and everything is always secondary to the thing which is really at hand.
Absolutely. No, and I definitely think that that's just important. It's basically the equivalent of touch grass.
Yeah,
More people need to touch grass. And Father, this has been a great conversation, and I really appreciate you coming on. And I guess just to wrap up, would you mind just letting people know where they can find you or your books, and a little bit just
yeah.
about your order?
Okay, so I am at the Monastery of New Norcia. You can probably see just behind my head,
Yes.
the New Norcia Institute for Benedictine Studies. We are a monastery in Western Australia, the oldest monastery in Australia, the only one founded by Spanish monks. We have a guest house. We put on retreats. You can visit our website at newnorcia.com.au and see all the things we have going on. For those who are further afield, we have a web shop where a lot of my books are available. Sensus Fidelium Press, wonderful firm started by a good friend of mine, Steve Cunningham, which publishes The Theatre of Cruelty, amongst other works, also the life of Martin Luther I mentioned before. So support those, and if you want to, I do a musician as well. If you want to support my music, you can probably find it on YouTube or Google or something like that.
Absolutely.
So,
I'll link all of that below too for people to easily find so that they can just click, click, click.
okay, cool.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you, Amber.
Of course. Thank you so much, Father, because this was a great conversation, one that I think was definitely needed. And, hopefully we'll be able to have you on the podcast again soon.
Thank you, Amber Rose. God bless you, and God bless all of your listeners.
Thank you so much. And with all that being said, guys, I hope you enjoyed this podcast episode. I hope you learned something, and I'll talk to you guys next time. Bye. Do you have questions or comments about today's episode? Email me at thereligioushippie@gmail.com or leave a voice message at anchor.fm/thereligioushippie. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you for listening. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Please be sure to rate and review this episode. This podcast is produced by Amber Rose and distributed by Metacortext Publishing. This podcast is copyright by The Religious Hippie, NFP. Any previously trademarked or copyright content is used by permission. Information and opinions in this podcast should not be construed as medical advice. Please be sure to visit the official website for The Religious Hippie at thereligioushippie.com or find me on social media for other unique content. Thank you.